I'm a forensic pathologist at the Riverside County Medical Examiner's Office in Moreno Valley, California, or at least I was, until I submitted my resignation 6 weeks ago. You can call me Dr. Helena Blackwood if you want. During my 23 years there, I've performed over 1,200 autopsies on every type of death you can imagine: brutal homicides, tragic suicides, devastating overdoses, freak accidents, and natural deaths that initially defied all medical explanation. But what I'm about to tell you about is the one case that made me question everything I thought I knew about death itself, human biology, and the very nature of what separates life from death. This case ultimately led me to leave forensic pathology entirely and abandon a career I had dedicated my entire adult life to building. The Riverside County Medical Examiner's Office serves over 2.4 million residents across 7,300 square miles of Southern California desert and mountain communities. It's one of the most challenging forensic facilities in the state, handling everything from cartel violence spilling over from the Mexican border to complex industrial accidents in the region's manufacturing centers. During my time there, I served as chief forensic pathologist for the Northern District and was regularly called upon to consult on the most complex and unusual death investigations throughout Southern California. I didn't stumble into forensic pathology by accident. After completing my medical degree at UCLA, I specialized in anatomical pathology before pursuing a fellowship in forensic pathology at the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office. I was drawn to the field because it combined my fascination with human anatomy, my analytical mind, and my desire to speak for those who could no longer speak for themselves. Every body that came to my examination table had a story to tell, and I considered myself fluent in the language of death. Over more than 2 decades, I had examined bodies in every conceivable state of decomposition, trauma, and disease. I'd performed autopsies on victims of house fires so intense that they were reduced to charred skeletal remains. I'd examined drowning victims, pulled from the Salton Sea after weeks underwater in 100-degree heat. I'd investigated deaths from exotic toxins, rare genetic disorders, and industrial accidents involving chemicals that most people had never heard of. I thought I had seen everything the human body could endure. I believed I understood the boundaries between life and death, the physiological processes that mark the transition from one state to the other. I was confident in my ability to read the biological evidence and determine not just how someone died, but when, where, and often why. That confidence would prove to be dangerously misplaced. The case that would ultimately end my career began on a sweltering Tuesday morning, August 15, 2023. I was reviewing toxicology reports from the previous week's cases when my phone rang with a call from Detective Raymond Castellanos of the Moreno Valley Police Department. Ray and I had worked together on dozens of cases over the years, and I could immediately tell from his tone that this one was different. "Dr. Blackwood, we've got a situation here that's going to require your expertise," he said, his voice carrying an unusual edge of uncertainty. "We've got a 31-year-old female, apparent natural death, but there are some circumstances that don't add up. The scene is, well, you'll need to see it to understand what I mean." Ray explained that officers had responded to a welfare check at an apartment complex in the Desert Vista neighborhood. The victim was Zara Nightingale, a freelance photographer who specialized in nature and landscape work. Her landlord had called police after noticing that her mail had been accumulating for several days, and her car hadn't moved from its parking spot. When officers entered Zara's apartment using the landlord's key, they found her lying peacefully on her bed, fully clothed, with no obvious signs of trauma or distress. But according to Ray, there were aspects of the scene that were troubling the investigators in ways they couldn't quite articulate. "The thing is, Doc," Ray continued, "she looks like she just laid down for a nap. But according to the mail accumulation and the condition of food in her refrigerator, she's been dead for at least 4 or 5 days. In this heat, with no air conditioning running. Well, you know what a body should look like after that long. I did know. In the desert climate of Southern California, with temperatures reaching over 110 degrees during summer days, a body begins showing obvious signs of decomposition within 24 to 48 hours. After 4 or 5 days, the changes should be dramatic and unmistakable. I arrived at Zara's apartment complex around 11:30 a.m., the sun already blazing down with the intensity that makes Southern California summers feel like living inside an oven. The Desert Vista apartments were typical of the area, a collection of 2-story stucco buildings painted in faded earth tones, surrounded by struggling palm trees and patches of desert landscaping that had long since given up the fight against the heat. Detective Castellanos met me in the parking lot, and I could see the confusion etched on his weathered face. Ray had been working homicide and suspicious deaths for over 15 years, and very little surprised him anymore. But as we walked towards Zara's apartment, he kept shaking his head and muttering about how nothing about this case made sense. "I've seen a lot of death scenes, Doc," he said as we climbed the stairs to the second floor, "but I've never seen anything like this." The apartment was locked from the inside, no signs of forced entry, no evidence of foul play. But when you see her, you'll understand why we're all scratching our heads. Zara Nightingale's apartment was a corner unit with large windows that should have turned the space into a greenhouse during the recent heat wave. The air conditioning unit was indeed off, and the apartment was stifling when we entered. But despite the oppressive heat and the fact that the body had allegedly been there for days, there was no smell of decomposition. In 23 years of forensic work, I had never entered a death scene with an extended post-mortem interval that didn't immediately assault my senses with the unmistakable odor of human decay. The absence of that smell was the first thing that made me pause and question what I was walking into. Zara was lying on her bed in what appeared to be a natural sleeping position. She was wearing a simple cotton dress and had a serene expression on her face, as if she had simply closed her eyes and drifted off into peaceful sleep. Her arms were relaxed at her sides, her legs slightly bent, and her head was resting comfortably on a pillow. But here's what made no medical sense. After an estimated 5 days in extreme heat, with no air conditioning, Zara's body showed absolutely no signs of decomposition. Her skin had normal color and elasticity. There was no bloating, no discoloration, no purging of bodily fluids. Her eyes were clear, not clouded as they should have been. Most remarkably, when I carefully lifted her hand to examine it, the joints moved freely with no sign of rigor mortis. Rigor mortis typically begins within 2 to 6 hours after death and reaches its peak around 12 hours, then gradually dissipates over the next 24 to 48 hours. If Zara had been dead for 5 days, rigor should have come and gone completely, leaving her body limp. But her muscles seemed to be frozen in a state between rigidity and relaxation that I had never encountered before. I spent nearly an hour at the scene, photographing everything, and trying to reconcile what I was observing with everything I knew about post-mortem changes. Detective Castellanos watched me work, occasionally asking questions that I couldn't answer. "So what do you think, Doc? How long has she really been dead?" "Based on the condition of the body," I said slowly, "I would estimate 12 to 18 hours. But based on the environmental evidence and witness statements, it's been much longer than that. Is it possible someone's been coming in here and, I don't know, preserving the body somehow?" I looked around the apartment again. There was no evidence of any preservation equipment, no signs that anyone had been in the apartment since Zara's death, no indication of any kind of artificial preservation process. The windows were locked from the inside, the door had been locked with no signs of tampering, and there were no other means of entry. As we waited for the coroner's transport team to arrive, Detective Castellanos shared what they had learned about Zara Nightingale. She was 31 years old, originally from Portland, Oregon, and had moved to the Moreno Valley area 3 years earlier to pursue her photography career. She specialized in desert landscape and wildlife photography, often spending days alone in remote areas of Joshua Tree National Park and the Mojave Desert. Sarah lived alone and was described by neighbors as quiet, friendly, and devoted to her work. She had no known medical conditions, no history of substance abuse, and no documented mental health issues. Her family in Portland described her as healthy, active, and passionate about her photography. She hiked regularly, maintained a vegetarian diet, and practiced yoga and meditation. The landlord, Mrs. Carmen Rodriguez, had last seen Sarah on Thursday, August 10th, when Sarah had stopped by the office to ask about getting her air conditioning unit serviced. Mrs. Rodriguez remembered the conversation clearly because Sarah had seemed perfectly normal, cheerful, energetic, and excited about a new photography project she was working on. Sarah's neighbor in the adjacent apartment, a retired teacher named Margaret Chen, remembered hearing Sarah moving around her apartment on Friday evening, August 11th. Margaret was specific about the timing because she had been watching her regular Friday night television program when she heard footsteps and what sounded like furniture being moved next door. If Margaret's recollection was accurate, Sarah had been alive on Friday evening, which meant she had been dead for only 4 days when we found her on Tuesday morning. But even 4 days in that heat should have produced significant decomposition changes that were simply not present. When the coroner's transport team arrived, I supervised the careful removal of Sarah's body from the apartment. Even during the transport process, I continued to be struck by the unusual preservation of the body. Typically, when moving a body that has been deceased for several days, there are significant changes in muscle tone, skin condition, and overall structural integrity. But Sarah's body handled exactly like someone who had died within the past day. Back at the medical examiner's office, I began the external examination in the late afternoon. My assistant for this case was Dr. Michael Santos, a forensic pathology resident who had been working with me for 6 months. Mike was bright, thorough, and had already assisted on over 50 autopsies during his rotation. His fresh perspective and attention to detail had been valuable on several complex cases. As we began documenting Sarah's body, Mike immediately noticed the same anomalies that had struck me at the scene. "Dr. Blackwood," he said, carefully examining Sarah's hands and arms, "this doesn't look like any extended post-mortem interval case I've seen. Are we sure about the timeline?" I explained the circumstances of the discovery and the witness statements that suggested she had been dead for at least 4 days. Mike looked puzzled and asked the same questions I had been asking myself. How was this level of preservation possible without artificial intervention? What could account for the complete absence of normal decomposition processes? The external examination revealed no obvious cause of death. Sarah appeared to be a healthy young woman, with no signs of trauma, disease, or substance abuse. Her body weight was normal, her muscle tone suggested regular exercise, and there were no needle marks, surgical scars, or other significant findings. But as we continued the examination, both Mike and I began to notice subtle characteristics that were difficult to describe but impossible to ignore. Sarah's skin had an unusual quality, not quite the normal texture of living skin, but not showing any of the changes associated with death either. Under the examination lights, her skin seemed to have an almost luminescent quality, as if it were lit from within. As we prepared to begin the internal examination the following morning, I decided to take additional photographs and measurements. Something about this case was nagging at me, and I wanted to document everything as thoroughly as possible before proceeding. When I returned to the examination room on Wednesday morning, August 16th, I immediately noticed something that made me stop in my tracks. Sarah's body appeared to have changed overnight, not in the way that bodies normally change during the post-mortem period, but in subtle ways that I couldn't immediately explain. Her skin tone seemed different, not discolored in the way that would indicate decomposition, but somehow more translucent. The luminescent quality I had noticed the day before was more pronounced, and there seemed to be a faint pattern visible beneath her skin, like delicate tracery or filigree work that extended across her arms and neck. I called Mike over to look at what I was seeing, and his reaction confirmed that I wasn't imagining these changes. "Dr. Blackwood," he said, Leaning closer to examine Zara's arms. Was that pattern visible yesterday during the external exam? I checked my photographs from the previous day. The pattern was not visible in any of the images. Whatever we were seeing had developed overnight, which should have been impossible in a deceased individual. I decided to proceed with the internal examination, but with additional caution and documentation. I had the feeling that we were dealing with something outside the normal parameters of forensic pathology, and I wanted to ensure that every finding was properly recorded and verified. Before beginning the internal examination, I took extensive additional photographs of the pattern we had observed beneath Zara's skin. Under different lighting conditions and magnification, the pattern became more distinct, a network of fine lines that seemed to follow the course of her circulatory and nervous systems, but with additional branching that didn't correspond to any known anatomical structures. I also decided to collect tissue samples for immediate microscopic examination before proceeding with the standard autopsy protocol. If we were dealing with some unknown pathological process, I wanted to understand it before potentially destroying evidence through the normal autopsy procedures. The tissue samples were taken from areas where the pattern was most visible: her forearm, neck, and the area just below her left collarbone. Under the microscope, the samples showed cellular structures that I had never encountered before in 23 years of examining human tissue. Mike and I spent nearly an hour examining the microscopic slides, comparing what we were seeing to normal tissue architecture. The cells appeared to be organized in geometric patterns that suggested some kind of crystalline structure, but they retained the basic characteristics of human tissue. It was as if Zara's cells had been reorganized according to principles that didn't exist in normal human biology. I decided to call Dr. Patricia Hernandez, our chief medical examiner, to review the case before proceeding further. Dr. Hernandez had over 30 years of experience in forensic pathology and had consulted on some of the most unusual cases in California's history. If anyone could help me understand what we were dealing with, it would be her. When Dr. Hernandez arrived and examined the tissue samples, her reaction was immediate and uncharacteristic. Patricia was known for her calm, analytical approach to even the most bizarre cases, but after looking at the microscopic slides, she sat back in her chair and was quiet for a long moment. "Helena," she said finally, "in 30 years of forensic pathology, I have never seen cellular organization like this. This isn't just unusual, it's unprecedented. We need to bring in specialists from the university and possibly contact the CDC about this case." The suggestion to contact the Centers for Disease Control was significant. In forensic pathology, we typically only involve the CDC when we suspect an infectious disease outbreak or a bioterrorism incident. Dr. Hernandez's concern about the case was becoming increasingly apparent. "What's your working theory?" I asked her. "I don't have one," she admitted. "The preservation of the body, the cellular changes, the pattern development, none of it fits any known pathological process. We might be dealing with some kind of unknown biological phenomenon, or possibly exposure to something that's not in our reference materials." As Wednesday afternoon progressed, I found myself facing a decision that would prove to be more significant than I realized at the time. I could proceed with the standard autopsy protocol and risk destroying evidence of whatever was happening to Zara's body, or I could delay the autopsy and conduct additional testing that might help us understand the anomalous findings. Dr. Hernandez and I decided to suspend the autopsy until we could consult with specialists in cellular biology, infectious diseases, and possibly materials science. The tissue samples were sent to laboratories at UC Riverside and UCLA for analysis that went far beyond our normal capabilities. I spent that evening researching medical literature, trying to find any reported cases of similar post-mortem preservation or cellular changes. I searched through databases of forensic pathology journals, medical anomaly reports, and even some fringe scientific publications that I normally wouldn't consider credible sources. I found nothing. No case reports, no research studies, no mention anywhere in medical literature of the kind of cellular reorganization and post-mortem preservation we were observing in Zara Nightingale's body. That night, I lay awake thinking about the implications of what we had discovered. In my entire career, I had always been able to categorize and explain my findings, even in the most complex cases. Unusual toxins, rare genetic disorders, bizarre accident. There was always a medical explanation that fit within the established understanding of human biology and pathology, but Zara Nightingale was presenting something that existed outside those boundaries. The preservation of her body, the cellular changes, the pattern that had developed overnight, none of it fit any known biological process, pathological or otherwise. More troubling was the possibility that we might be dealing with something contagious. If whatever had happened to Zara could affect other people, we had a responsibility to understand it quickly and contain it if necessary. The implications of an unknown biological agent that could fundamentally alter human cellular structure were too serious to ignore. When I arrived at the office on Thursday morning, August 17th, I found urgent messages waiting from both of the laboratories that were analyzing Zara's tissue samples. Dr. Rebecca Martinez from UC Riverside and Dr. James Wong from UCLA both needed to speak with me immediately about their preliminary findings. I called Dr. Martinez first. Her voice was tight with excitement and concern when she answered. "Dr. Blackwood, I need you to understand that what I'm about to tell you contradicts everything we know about cellular biology," she began. "The tissue samples you sent show evidence of a crystalline matrix that has somehow integrated with the organic cellular structure. It's as if the cells have been transformed into a hybrid organic-inorganic material while maintaining their biological function." She explained that under electron microscopy, Zara's cells showed structures that appeared to be part biological tissue and part mineral crystal. The cells were still recognizably human, but they had been altered in ways that should have been incompatible with life. My conversation with Dr. Wong yielded similarly disturbing findings. His analysis focused on the molecular structure of the tissue and revealed the presence of elements that shouldn't exist in human biology. Trace amounts of compounds that were more commonly found in geological samples than biological ones. As I hung up the phone after speaking with Dr. Wong, I realized that I was standing at a threshold between the known and unknown, between conventional medical science and something that challenged the fundamental nature of life and death. Everything we had discovered about Zara Nightingale suggested that her death had involved processes that existed outside our understanding of human biology. The preservation of her body, the cellular transformation, the mineral integration, all of it pointed to something that shouldn't be possible according to established scientific principles. I sat in my office for a long time that Thursday morning, staring at Zara's case file and trying to process what we had uncovered. In a few hours I would have to decide whether to continue with the autopsy or seek additional consultation from experts in fields far removed from forensic pathology. But I had a growing certainty that whatever we discovered would fundamentally change my understanding of life, death, and the boundaries between organic and inorganic matter. I was about to enter territory that went beyond medical science into realms that challenged the very nature of what it means to be human. Little did I know that the most disturbing discoveries were yet to come, and that Zara Nightingale's body held secrets that would ultimately force me to question everything I thought I knew about the nature of existence itself. After 3 days of consultations, laboratory analyses, and sleepless nights, I made the decision that would haunt me for the rest of my career. Despite every instinct telling me to wait for more expert opinions, despite the unprecedented nature of our findings, I decided to proceed with Zara Nightingale's internal examination. The family deserved answers, and I convinced myself that I could handle whatever we might discover. I was catastrophically wrong. On Friday morning, August 18th, Dr. Santos and I returned to the examination room with additional equipment borrowed from the university's materials science department. We had arranged for real-time consultation with Dr. Martinez via video link, and Dr. Hernandez would observe the entire procedure. When I made the initial Y incision across Zara's chest, the first thing I noticed was the complete absence of blood, not the dark, coagulated blood typical of post-mortem examination, but no blood at all. Instead, her cardiovascular system appeared to be filled with a clear, crystalline substance that had the consistency of liquid glass. Dr. Santos immediately stepped back from the table. "Dr. Blackwood, that's not human anatomy." He was right. As I carefully explored the chest cavity, I discovered that every major organ had been transformed into something that defied biological classification. Zara's heart was still recognizably heart-shaped, but it had become a translucent, crystalline structure that seemed to pulse with its own internal light. Her lungs had been converted into delicate, web-like formations that resembled coral more than human tissue. But it was when I examined Zara's brain that I encountered something that made me question my own sanity. Her skull contained what appeared to be a perfect geometric structure, a complex crystalline formation that had somehow replaced her brain tissue while maintaining the exact neural patterns and connections. Under magnification, I could see that every neuron had been preserved within the crystal matrix, creating a three-dimensional map of her consciousness frozen in mineral form. It was as if someone had found a way to transform living thought into living stone. Dr. Martinez's voice came through the video link, tight with disbelief. "Helena, what you're showing me is impossible. Organic tissue cannot undergo this kind of transformation and maintain structural integrity. This violates every principle of biology and physics that we understand." As I continued the examination, carefully documenting each impossible finding, something happened that I still struggle to describe coherently. While I was photographing the crystalline structure that had replaced Zara's heart, the formation began to emit a low harmonic tone. The sound was barely audible at first, like the distant ringing of crystal glasses, but it gradually increased in volume and complexity. Dr. Santos heard it too, and we both froze, staring at the organ that was somehow producing music from beyond death. Then the lights in the examination room began to flicker in rhythm with the harmonic tones. The electronic equipment, cameras, microscopes, even the ventilation system, started responding to whatever energy was emanating from Zara's transformed body. What happened next defies rational explanation, but I'm telling you exactly what occurred because I believe the truth, however impossible, deserves to be documented. The crystalline structure in Zara's chest cavity began to project images, not onto any surface, but somehow directly into the air above her body. The images showed Zara herself, very much alive, standing in what appeared to be a vast crystalline cavern deep underground. She was speaking, though we couldn't hear her words over the harmonic tones. But somehow, I understood what she was trying to communicate. She had discovered something during her desert photography expeditions, an ancient mineral formation that existed beneath the Mojave Desert. This formation was not terrestrial in origin, and it had the ability to transform organic matter into a hybrid state that bridged the gap between life and death, between organic and inorganic existence. Zara hadn't died from any conventional cause. She had been transformed by her contact with this mineral formation, converted into a crystalline being that existed in a state beyond traditional biological life. The projection showed her moving freely through underground caverns, no longer bound by the limitations of human physiology. As the images continued to play above Zara's body, I realized that this wasn't just a recording, it was a real-time communication. Zara was somehow still conscious, still aware, existing in this transformed state, and she was trying to tell us something crucial. The final image showed the mineral formation itself, massive crystalline structure that pulsed with the same harmonic frequencies we were hearing in the examination room. But surrounding it were dozens of other figures, all of them appearing to be humans who had undergone the same transformation that Zara had experienced. Then the images shifted to show the surface world, my cities, people, normal human life. But overlaid on these scenes were spreading networks of crystalline growth, suggesting that whatever existed beneath the desert was not content to remain hidden underground. In that moment, I understood that Zara's transformation wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of something much larger, something that posed a fundamental threat to human existence as we knew it. The mineral formation was actively seeking to convert organic life into its crystalline hybrid state, and Zara's death was just the beginning of a process that could spread across the entire planet. The harmonic tones suddenly stopped, the lights returned to normal, and the images vanished. Sarah's body lay still on the examination table, once again appearing to be nothing more than an impossible medical anomaly. But I knew what I had witnessed, and I knew that continuing this examination would make me complicit in something beyond my understanding or control. I set down my instruments and walked out of the examination room. Dr. Santos called after me, asking where I was going, but I couldn't explain what had happened. How do you tell someone that you've just been contacted by the consciousness of a deceased person who is warning you about an alien mineral formation that threatens to convert all of humanity into crystalline beings? I went directly to my office, wrote my resignation letter, and submitted it that afternoon. I told Dr. Hernandez that I was experiencing health issues that prevented me from continuing my duties, which wasn't entirely untrue. Witnessing what I had witnessed had definitely damaged my psychological health. The official autopsy report for Zara Nightingale lists her cause of death as undetermined natural causes with unusual post-mortem preservation due to unknown environmental factors. The crystalline transformation, the harmonic emissions, the projected images, none of it appears in any official documentation. Dr. Santos was transferred to a different facility shortly after the incident. Dr. Hernandez retired 6 months later, citing personal reasons. The tissue samples sent to the universities were reportedly destroyed due to contamination concerns, and all research into the anomalous findings was discontinued. Zara's body was cremated at high temperature, which should have been impossible given the mineral composition we had observed. But according to the crematory records, the process proceeded normally, leaving only standard human ash residue. Since leaving forensic pathology, I've become obsessed with monitoring missing persons reports from the Mojave Desert region. Over the past year, there have been 17 unexplained disappearances of hikers, photographers, and geological researchers working in remote desert areas. None of these cases received significant media attention, and none of the missing persons have been found. I believe that each of these disappearances represents another person who has encountered the mineral formation and undergone the same transformation that affected Zara Nightingale. They're not dead in any conventional sense. They've been converted into something else, something that exists in the crystalline realm beneath the desert. I'm sharing this story, not because I expect anyone to believe it, but because I believe humanity deserves a warning about what's coming. The transformation process appears to be accelerating, and if my research is correct, the crystalline formation is growing stronger with each person it converts. Zara Nightingale showed me that death isn't the end, it's just another form of existence that we don't understand. But she also showed me that there are forces in our world that view human consciousness as nothing more than raw material for their own expansion. I left forensic pathology because I realized that some mysteries are too dangerous to solve, some truths too terrible to uncover. But I also left because I understood that my role as someone who speaks for the dead had taken on a significance I never could have imagined. The dead, it turns out, sometimes have very urgent things to say to the living. And in Zara's case, that message was a warning about the future of human existence itself. I've done hundreds of autopsies, but only one made me leave the room. It also made me leave my entire profession, my life's work, and my fundamental understanding of what it means to be human. Some cases are meant to remain unsolved, some doors should never be opened, and some examinations should never be completed. Zara Nightingale taught me that there are worse things than death, and that sometimes the greatest service you can provide to humanity is to walk away from the truth before it's too late.